10 people who cheated death. Number 10. Hit the nail on the head. For 39-year-old construction worker Isidro Mejia, getting nailed took on a brand new meaning one fateful day in 2004. Mejia was fixing a roof when he lost his footing on a ladder and fell onto his co-worker who was using a high-powered nail gun. And you guessed it, the nail gun went off. Almost immediately, 6 nails were driven deep into Mejia's skull. Barely breathing, he was rushed to hospital straight away and underwent intensive surgery across a 5-day period to remove the nails. 4 from his brain, 1 from his spine, and 1 lodged in his face. Doctors said that the nails were just millimeters away from rupturing his spinal cord and brainstem, saving him from paralysis or death. Despite concerns from his neurosurgeon, Mejia miraculously made a full recovery. Number 9. The Man with 7 Lives. The chances of being struck by lightning are 300,000 to 1, so imagine how unlucky Park Ranger Roy C. Sullivan felt being struck by lightning a whopping 7 times. Over a period of 35 years, a series of lightning strikes resulted in some incredible injuries. On 2 separate occasions after being struck by lightning, Roy's hair was set on fire. Another strike badly burnt his shoulder, and the 6th strike injured his ankle. All very impressive, but it was unlucky number 7 that really takes the biscuit. The final time Roy was hit in 1977 resulted in him being hospitalized for burns on his chest and stomach. But that doesn't really do it justice, because this final strike also coincided with the 22nd time, yes, 22 times, that he fought off a bear with a stick. The lightning had apparently attracted the bear's attention and it tried to steal Roy's trout, but no one steals a trout off Roy. Number 8. World's luckiest man. Roy C. Sullivan and Frayne Selak have one thing in common: they've both danced with death 7 times and survived. Selak's first brush with death came in January 1962 when he was on a train that crashed into a river. He was luckily pulled to safety, although the same thing happened again in a bus crash 4 years later. If that's not impressing you, in 1963 Selak also survived a plane crash by being blown out of the plane's door, somehow landing on a haystack. Meanwhile, twice in the 70s he survived car accidents, whilst in 1995 he was run over by a bus. Just a year later, whilst driving, Selak swerved to avoid a head-on collision and was ejected from his car, but managed to hold on to a tree as he watched his car plummet down 90 meters into a gorge. But all that bad luck finally turned around for him in 2003. 2 days after his 73rd birthday, he won the equivalent of $1,110,000. Ka-ching. Number 7. Sole Survivor. Living through a plane crash is well easy. Well, at least it is compared to surviving a crash and then having to live for 10 days alone in a rainforest while suffering major injuries. But that's exactly what happened to 17-year-old Juliana Kupka as she was flying over the Peruvian rainforest on Christmas Eve 1971. The plane carrying her was hit by lightning, causing it to break up in mid-air and leaving Juliana to plummet 3 kilometers to the forest floor while strapped in her seat. Miraculously, she survived the fall, suffering only a broken collarbone, a gash to her right arm, and a swollen right eye. Thankfully, Juliana had been taught survival skills from her father and located a small stream which she followed in the hope that it would lead her to civilization. After 9 days alone, wading through a stream with severely infected insect bites, she found a boat moored near a shelter. The next day, she was found by hunters and brought home to safety, where it was revealed she was the only survivor of the plane crash. Number 6. Tornado Torment. Tornadoes always look more fun than the reality, and 19-year-old Matt Suter learned this the hard way. Against all odds, the teenager survived after being blown the equivalent of 3 football fields by a tornado in Missouri in 2006. The 240 km/h tornado ripped through his mobile trailer, engulfing the windows, doors, and finally Matt himself. He descended into its vortex, passed out, and was eventually dropped in an open field. Matt awoke and somehow managed to walk away from the field unscathed, minus a gash on his forehead. Matt currently holds the Guinness World Record for farthest distance survived in the tornado. The longest previously documented incident took place on July 1st, 1955, when a tornado carried a 9-year-old girl and her pony 304 meters before setting them down virtually unhurt. Still, we wouldn't recommend riding a tornado, no matter how bored you are. Number 5. The Determined Frenchman. Could you imagine surviving a car crash and a plane crash and still turning up to work the same day? Well, for one very determined French engineer, Pierre Cotter, this actually happened on January the 20th, 1992. Pierre was driving to the airport in Lyon, France, when he lost control of his car and was involved in a horrific pileup. He courageously pulled himself from the wreckage and instead of seeking medical attention like a normal human being, he booked a later flight and headed to the airport. As it turns out, the plane Pierre boarded happened to be Air Interflight 148, aka the doomed flight that crashed into a French mountain, killing 87 passengers. Amazingly, Pierre Cotter was one of only 9 who survived it. At this point, you'd think he'd throw in the towel on his daily commute, but no, not Pierre. The Frenchman carried on his journey and even managed to make it in time for his morning meeting in Strasbourg. Number 4. The Real Robinson Crusoe. Having some time alone on a private beach sounds like anyone's idea of paradise, but not for Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, who in the 18th century spent 4 years as a castaway. After initially being marooned, Selkirk predicted rescue would be imminent, so he read the Bible to pass the time. But after weeks of hopelessly waiting, he resigned himself to a long stay and began to create a life for himself, with only rats, goats, and cats for company. Sadly, no volleyball was available. Following several years of isolation, one day 2 ships drew into the island's bay. Hopeful that this was his chance at rescue, Selkirk rushed to the shore. But unfortunately, as the Spanish sailors approached, they began shooting at poor Selkirk. Miraculously, Selkirk managed to evade capture and the Spaniards eventually departed. It wasn't until 3 years later when another ship came to his rescue. Selkirk lit a signal fire to alert the British sailors, and a landing party was dispatched to find a wild man dressed in goat skins. His incredible story fascinated the British public and became the inspiration for Daniel Defoe's fictional character, Robinson Crusoe. Number 3. Shipwrecked. Tammy Oldham Ashcraft and her fiancé, Richard Sharp, were sailing to San Diego from Tahiti in September 1983 when tragedy struck 3 weeks into their journey. The pair got caught in Hurricane Raymond and were unable to outsail it, so fought desperately to keep their boat afloat. But the 12-meter waves were too much for their small boat, which eventually capsized, knocking Ashcraft unconscious in the process. The following day, the storm had passed and Ashcraft regained consciousness. She scrambled above deck to discover Sharp's safety line dangling over the end of the boat, but he was gone, presumed drowned. Alone, terrified, injured with a bad cut on her head and grieving for her fiancé, Ashcraft unbelievably managed to rig a makeshift sail from what was left of the battered boat and navigated back to dry land. Surviving on just peanut butter and canned food, she sailed 2,414 kilometers in 41 days to reach safety in Hawaii. Number 2. Toilet trauma. In 2013, Nigerian sailor Harrison Okene survived for almost 3 days underwater by crouching in an air bubble after his tugboat capsized whilst he was on the toilet. The 29-year-old was the sole survivor of the Jackson 4, which overturned after being battered by heavy swells. Harrison was underwater for almost 60 hours with just a can of Coke for company when he heard hammering on the deck. A team of South African divers scouring the waters on a body recovery operation were shocked to hear faint knocking in reply. Spooked to find Harrison in his underwater air pocket, the divers rescued him from the depths of the sea. Worried for his health back on land, he then spent 2 days in a decompression chamber following the ordeal. Number 1. Superhuman Skydiver. The probability of surviving after falling from a height of 4,400 meters is little to none, but not if you're superhuman skydiver Joan Murray, who had a bunch of life-saving fire ants on her side. On September the 25th, 1999, panic struck Murray when mid-skydive her main parachute failed to open. With nothing to slow her speed, she rocketed to the ground at 128 kilometers per hour, but her fall was cushioned by a mound of fire ants. As Murray lay injured and unconscious, she was stung over 200 times by the ants. Unbelievably, rather than adding to her injuries, doctors believed that the shock of being stung released a surge of adrenaline which kept her heart beating. But those ants aren't miracle workers, and as a result of slamming to the ground, Murray suffered serious injuries. She had shattered the right side of her body and knocked out the fillings from her teeth. She went into a coma for 2 weeks and had to undergo 20 reconstructive surgeries and 17 blood transfusions. Following her crazy ordeal, she continued to work at the Bank of America, turning down retirement because of disability. She took physical therapy sessions and went on to do a 37th skydive in 2001. Nice.
If you found this video interesting, head over to 10 people who cheated death on 9/11.
There's some really famous celebs in there, absolutely crazy stories. So
Seth MacFarlane.
Don't ruin it for them.
Well, that's one, isn't it?
Spoiler alert.
There's at least another 9, isn't there?
There is another 9, but what are they? There's only one way to find out. Don't tell them. Go over to the video.
Yeah, so go and check it out. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
In a bit.
Peace.